Platforms for Accessible Remote Learning Q&A session with Dr. Rachel Sessler-Trinkowski, UMass Boston, Mr. Bill Wilmot, CAST, Dr. Matt Marino, University of Central Florida, and Dr. Trey Vasquez, University of Central Florida. Our moderator is Dr. Jose Blackerby, CAST.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Trey. Thank you, Matt. Those presentations were great. We have about 13 minutes to have an open discussion and a question and answer period. This first one is directed to you, Rachel, I believe. It's from an anonymous attendee that says, now that more students will be accessing educational learnings from home, what are some strategies for working with parents to support their children?
So I think it will really depend. I think you have to be flexible with, many parents are working. So I think understanding that parents right now may be working while their students, their children are at home taking classes at the same time. So I think that's an important factor. There may be a need for more asynchronous options versus synchronous live options. So you may need to look at different solutions to meet those needs.
Great. So we have a question from Amber, and I think this is directed to Matt and Trey. Amber asks, what technical support did instructors have to gamify their courses? They mentioned a company, I think. It seems like this is a great tool, but potentially expensive to create.
We were really fortunate to have funding from Ed Metz, who started this show for us today. Back in 2008, we received our first award to develop a series of games and curriculum materials through the Filament Games company. And then another company that Trey and I have been working with recently is called the Social Express, and they have products related to social and emotional development.
And we, in terms
I do not know
of
how much those cost.
Yeah, in terms of those two companies, those all incur some sort of cost. However, we do have some products that we've helped develop with PBS Kids, which are rooted in the next generation science standards. Now they're geared towards early childhood and elementary school, but Hero Elementary is actually available at the end of this month. It's a brand new set of series coming out focused on NGSS and their new programming. So that's free and freely available.
And we have one more to mention. We just started a project called Model Me. It's about conceptual understanding of mathematics. And it's a curriculum designed for Tier 2 mathematics classrooms. And so that will be freely available starting next year as we'll be testing.
So here's a question from Sita, and I think actually this would apply maybe to all of you. And the question is, how do you implement and assist small groups during remote learning sessions?
I'll go ahead and start. So I think you have flexibility of different tools. I teach both online at university, and I also teach at a Lighthouse for the Blind. So if you're teaching one-on-one, there's tools that you could use for just one-on-one, whether you need face-to-face communication or audio. But you could also set up group training. Some of the remote control technologies, if you're doing any technology instruction, can be used where you could actually connect to multiple computers at the same time. So that's an option, but also, Zoom, Hangouts Meet, which both platforms are fully accessible. Hangouts Meet does have a built-in automated captioning feature, but keep in mind that it is automated, so there are some limitations to that compared to a live captioner. So there's many different options for having that. And I think it's important to have options for students at whatever age, whether it's children or adults, where they are interacting with each other. So I think the more group activities, the better right now.
One of the things that we've been using at the post-secondary level a lot is we have a larger class. We use the breakout room feature of Zoom, and that allows us to assign smaller groups in a given specific task that they need to complete as a team. So that's just another thing to buttress what Rachel was saying.
Thank you.
Just to add one thing to that, One kind of possible use of those tools is a kind of drop-in office hours. So even if students, you're just there present while they're working, they can consult you as needed, has been a strategy that I've seen be very successful for teachers, especially of younger kids. And then the other possibility is thinking about how to provide some of the scaffolds that you would provide for small group work in the classroom in a remote learning environment and allow them to connect with each other to collaborate. That depends on the age level, of course, but there's a lot of guidance in scaffolding, like group roles and specific outcomes, and clarity around how they're going to be assessed. That's necessary to make that really successful without a teacher there.
Here's a question from an anonymous attendee, Bill, and I think I'm going to turn this to you. What are some ideas for helping faculty create accessible instructional materials, lectures, handouts, LMS pages, and PDFs?
Well, I would send you first to the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. That's housed at CAST. There's a lot of guidance there. The other thing I would say, and this is linked in the resource doc that I put, as is the Ames Center, is just understanding the accessibility features that are built into so many of the software platforms that we're using. Just about every software platform that you're using has accessibility features built in, and they get deeper almost every day. So to me, that's a big one, is just understanding those, and you could spend a lifetime trying to keep up with that.
If I could add one thing to that, I think it's important to understand that the teachers, again, with K through 12 or higher ed, they're content experts, and they're not necessarily as comfortable with technology alone, let alone accessibility. So if they need supports, it's important to make sure that they get those supports, whether it's through the school system or third party. I have a list of resources that I've compiled for companies that do remediation or work with people to either do trainings or assist with remediation of individual documents. So that's on our Lighthouse page. It's lighthousepalmbeaches.org, and there's an accessibility resource list.
Rachel, I'm going to turn this one to you. This is from Daryl. What about fields that need context, such as orientation and mobility? How can we make those fields more available?
That's tough. I know there's many mobility instructors who are working on that question. I am not a mobility instructor, but there is one of the resources in the presentation handout that I did with AFB. It's in that resource list. It's either in the PowerPoint or the separate webpage that it's a link. Some O&M specialists have come together and they have built a very long list of resources. There's, of course, some things that can be done safely, but that safety factor must be taken into consideration. Thank you.
So here's a question from JVE. And I think this probably could go to all three of you, but special attention to Trey and Matt and Bill. How do you use UDL for students who do not engage with video games and non-human engagement? There was a lot of recommendation for other platforms that are available, but not for more significant disabilities.
So if you have a visual impairment, which I do, it can be very challenging in a game environment. So what we try to do is reduce the amount of information on the screen as much as possible for those students who need it, right? So you would dial back to the essential core game element. And then we offer alternatives through keyboard accessibility because some students can't use a mouse, right? So we use switches as well.
So Objective Ed is one company. There's many, but Objective Ed has developed a number of games specifically for students with vision loss. And they, you could look up their website. Also, if you go to audiogames.net, they're not necessarily educational, but there's lists of games. There's many games that are accessible for people with vision loss, whether it be apps or software on different computing devices.
Marianne asks, I think this will be a good one for you, Rachel. What is the best platform for sharing videos with groups? Currently, I am having difficulty with the sound of videos in Google Meetup with groups of 40 or more.
Zoom is definitely one of my favorites. Zoom and Hangout Meet. It really depends on what you're doing. What I find with the different platforms is you have to make sure that you're enabling the audio and video. And I think some people are not as comfortable with the tech at the beginning to do that, and that's where people tend to run into issues. What I have found is if you just the basic, just turn the computer off, turn it back on, that often will fix some of the issues. Sometimes you do have to go into sound settings to address that. But Hangouts Meet or Zoom are my two favorites. And they are both accessible, fully keyboard accessible on both platforms.
Thank you. All right, this is from Lauren. And again, I think this is something that all of you could weigh in on. How can we reduce cognitive load, the demands of digitalization, challenges of instruction, technical challenges of instructors towards incorporating and valuing UDL guidelines into higher education in a range of subject areas? So cognitive load is the question.
To me, that always starts with being very clear about what your goal is right now and thinking about multiple ways of getting to that goal. In a higher ed context, you're going to have a lot of assumed background knowledge and finding ways to support that background knowledge. That's true, starting probably in fourth grade and even earlier. But in the way instruction is traditionally designed, we support that background knowledge less and less. But having kind of on-demand as needed resources for background knowledge is a huge piece of that. And some of those can be built into digital textbooks and that kind of thing.
I would also add to that, having your notes prepared for the students so that the students don't have to sit in class and write extensively for an hour and a half. If you have your notes ahead of time online, then the students can have that and refer to it and ask questions and pay attention to the lecture.
One of the things that I saw on the questions was also asking about those accommodations within the platforms of LMSs. Frequently, you can use something like Google Slides and put it in presenter mode, and it'll automatically caption things for you. So if you pre-record your materials, that offers a level of support for those students as well.
Often people think they're going to take that face-to-face class and they're going to put it online and it will look exactly the same, and that doesn't work. So you have to consider, the time of someone sitting in front of a device, staring at a screen, and you probably want to break up lessons and consider having more things available asynchronously where students can access it anytime, anywhere, versus having everything live like you may do in a face-to-face classroom. One of the links I have available in my resource list is from the Online Learning Consortium. They have put it out there and they have some great guides for transitioning from face-to-face to online platforms.
So,
and just to add one thing to what Rachel just said, a lot of those things are just as relevant in face-to-face classes where sustaining for an hour or a 2-hour lecture is hard for some of us.
So unfortunately, we have run up against our time allotment, but I want to thank all of the panelists for the video and for the Q&A. I want to thank the people who posed questions, and I want to thank all of the attendees, and please enjoy the rest of the conference. We'll be watching along with you.